Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live Well, Sister. It's your girl, Marcie L. Thomas. If you watched before, I'm looking a little different today. I decided to go do a little self-care and get something different done with my hair, so I'm super excited to debut my new do. So welcome, and I'm really excited just to have you here for the conversation that we're going to have this evening. Our particular guest is someone that I've had a chance to talk to before. We've been following each other on social media for quite a while, and I found out she's been following me longer than I knew. So I'll be excited to talk about that. But this evening, we're going to be talking about how we can use books, which I'm a lover of books, and how we can use books to help us when we're having different challenges in our life and use them as a therapeutic resource. So with that in mind, our special guest for the evening is Emely Rumble. She is an avid reader, freelance writer, and licensed clinical social worker in New York City with over 12 years of experience providing therapy to children, individuals, couples, and families. She is also a school-based social worker who has counseled students, administrators, staff, and families. She graduated from Mount Holyoke College with a BA in English Literature and earned her Master of Social Work from Smith College School of Social Work. As the powerhouse behind Literapy NYC, she uses bibliotherapy as a healing tool to assist her clients and ever-growing social media community. So without any further delay, welcome Emely, aka M.
Hi, Marcie. You look beautiful.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you here. We had an opportunity to meet each other virtually a couple of months ago, back in December, and participated in a wonderful panel. And I fell in love with you then and knew that I wanted to have you come talk directly to the Brown Girl Collective audience. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes. So let's get into it now. As I already mentioned, you are an avid reader who has now taken that love of reading and learned how to help others through reading as well as a therapist. So when exactly did you fall in love with reading?
I fell in love with reading in the first grade. I'll never forget my first grade teacher, Miss Parkins. It's under-resourced schools in the hood, right? Like we barely have libraries, but Miss Parkins found a way to make reading accessible, to make it fun. She would take us to the public library. She would buy us McDonald's. Like she just made reading a whole vibe. And I loved being in her class. I never felt like I lacked anything as a student, until maybe I would interact with other kids in my community who are doing other things at their schools. And then I might catch wind of like, oh, well, my school doesn't do that. But with Miss Parkins, reading was always an adventure. She reminded me so much of Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. It was just like every time we read a book, we would engage with the text in really creative ways. She'd have us dress up. She'd have us role play, act out. I feel like she is so much of the reason her classroom, was where my love of reading was really born. The puppet shows, everything that she did to make stories come to life.
Right, that definitely makes a difference. As you were mentioning that, I thought of just growing up and learning to read and enjoying getting into books as well. And you and I kind of talked about this a little bit before we came on, that for me, I'm a little older than you. So I didn't have the opportunity to read a lot of books where I saw myself in the stories as I was coming up, unlike some of the people from the generations of today and yourself. So how did that make you feel when you had the opportunity to find characters that resonated with you personally?
Well, it wasn't until honestly college, because I
Oh,
feel like
okay.
so
Okay,
much
it's less
of
similar. Okay.
yeah, I'm 37. One
Okay.
of my new clients, she's 12. She told me the other day she thought I was 21. I was like, "Oh yeah,
Okay.
let's go with that."
Yes,
But I'm
yes.
an 80s baby, so grew up in the 90s. And in high school, we were reading like Catcher in the Rye and
Mhm.
The Great Gatsby. So I couldn't necessarily relate to those characters and I didn't feel seen in those books necessarily, but I still loved them for what they offered
Mhm.
me. But it was in college where I found the sweet spot. That's where I started to get introduced to writers like Esmeralda Santiago, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, Sandra Cisneros, and me being African American and Puerto Rican, like that was a very, um, that was new to me because I had
Mhm.
never sort of had anyone on an academic level like censor the work of Black and Latinx women writers.
Right.
So to be in college, and I went to Mount Holyoke, so it's a liberal arts college, I was
Right.
able to sort of create um my like curriculum around specific areas of interest. So even though I got my BA in literature, I had a focus on Black women writers,
Okay.
just women of BIPOC communities in general. And so that was really where I was like, whoa, you mean to tell me that like there is a whole body of work out here of
Yes.
just Black and brown women? And I was never like, um I just never had access. I never knew the depth and the breadth of the work that existed out there. And then I read, um oh my goodness, what's the name of it? It's failing me right now. Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Okay, I know what you're
Melissa
talking
Pink
about. I can't think of who wrote it,
Estes.
but I know.
Oh my goodness. And that
Mhm.
just completely, that book changed my life because she talks so much about like archetypes and myths and the things that we sort of know as symbols, but maybe we don't connect our stories as women of color to these symbols. And so she made it come to life in a psychological sense, in a spiritual sense. And after Mount Holyoke, I knew that I wanted to do social work. I didn't
Mhm.
know that I was going to end up becoming a psychotherapist, but I feel like that book was sort of where the marriage between mental health and literature really started for me. And then it was all, down the rabbit hole from there.
Wow. And that's just something to think about, that you were able to marry the two together. Because I kind of wondered that, because you would think with your love of literature and books and having that degree in literature that maybe you would have wanted to teach or something like that, which you really are teaching anyway. But, instead of pursuing going into a formal classroom, to go into social work. So, and therapy. So was there a particular reason why you went that route versus perhaps going the educator route?
Yeah, I just knew that um I think a lot of it for me was like the performative aspect of being an educator isn't for me. I'm very introverted and I'm like I feel like teachers have to be, on their P's and Q's a lot and just like you're in front of the classroom all day. When you're not in front of the classroom, you're advocating with the administration. If you're it's just there's a lot of energy that teachers expend and they're magicians with it. But that's not my
Mhm.
calling. So I
Right.
knew like for me it was gonna be more an insular career, either as a
Mhm.
therapist or a writer or a journalist. But I was always passionate about mental health because I grew up in a family where there were many glaring mental health struggles that we didn't really address other than to say let's pray about it or let's
Mm.
lean on the church for support. So growing up, one of my aunts who was actually my babysitter was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I didn't know until I reached adolescence what her official diagnosis was, but I knew that she was unwell.
Okay.
Um, and so my grandmother would always have the pastor over to pray for her. She'd have episodes that were, for me at the time, terrifying because as a kid,
Mm.
I'm like, what's going on? She didn't take her meds, but in my grandmother's mind, this is spiritual.
No.
We need to pray. We need to break out the oil. And so I grew up seeing a lot of mental health struggles at home, in the church, in my community. My grandmother, I think I found out down the line that she was a healer in her own way.
Mm,
Um, but she was a spiritual woman and a community minded woman. So she was always having people over the house, people who would just come from Puerto Rico or migrate to the States. If they needed a meal, they were welcome. So I grew up seeing a lot of these things, but also seeing that there wasn't like mental health resources that were accessible to my community, and that where there were resources, they weren't relatable. Like people didn't want those resources.
right, right.
And so mental health has always been like a really big passion of mine. And I think when I started to develop my skills and my understanding of how books can become a tool to heal and to help us not just increase our self understanding, but also like improve our capacity to respond to
Mm,
things, to
mhm,
seek out answers for some of life's biggest problems, even problems that are maybe like existential ones, like why do we have to suffer, right?
mhm.
Um I was thinking about things like that as like a little girl. I was always very
Wow.
much, in my head about these big questions. So yeah, I think that's where it started.
Yeah, it's funny. We are alike in that way, and that I love to read. I would go to the library and grab books and take them home and just read, pour through the books. And then as I got, a little older, my father would make me read books and write reports about those books. I definitely understand, the ability to take and get those stories and have them make sense. But you also touched upon something about, therapeutic services. Well, two things. Number one, a way that a lot of Black and Brown people do tend to lean more towards its spirituality versus, help. And the fact that some of the help that is available to us isn't always culturally sensitive
Yeah.
or just something that we wouldn't want to do. So, was that one of the reasons why you chose to go this route? And how has that played out for you thus far in your career?
Yeah. So that's exactly why I chose to go this route. I wasn't intending to start my private therapy practice um last year, but my daughter was born at the height of the pandemic in 2020. The same year my son was diagnosed with autism after
Mm,
he turned 2. Yeah, he turned 2 and she was born. So sort of in like the thick of making my maternal adjustments and figuring out how I'm going to be able to parent the way that I want to parent, but also still continue, professionally in my career. It was my therapist. She was like, "Emily, you have been like denying this calling on your life for so long.
mm,
It's time. This is like the
mhm,
universe telling you it's time for you to have your own practice. You're ready. You've been doing this for 12 plus years. Like, just do it. I'm here. I got your back." And I think I needed that little push. So when I
mhm.
started thinking about who I wanted to serve, how I wanted to market who I am as a therapist and what I do, naturally bibliotherapy was the
Right.
thing because that's what I do. And I started off my career as a school social worker,
Okay.
and stories and storytelling and working with ELA teachers in the classroom was how I got my students to come into the counseling room. So I started, building my brand, Literapy, which is a marriage between literature and therapy, and thinking about how am I going to message this to people so that they take me seriously, because bibliotherapy, even though it goes way back to 300 BC, in the Greco-Roman era, and it is a legitimate modality of treatment, it's not taken very seriously. It's kind of like, oh, expressive writing, dance therapy, drama therapy, like the
Mhm,
therapies that are under the umbrella of the creative arts.
mhm, mhm.
And serious therapists wouldn't niche down that way, right? Because it's
Mm,
not, the literature doesn't reflect that these methods are super effective in treating trauma or in treating um different diagnoses. And it's not that they're not effective, it's that the literature doesn't reflect that they're effective enough, or whatever the white supremacist ideology behind the therapies that get called valid and the ones that don't have to say about bibliotherapy. So I was like, I'm gonna do it. I trusted spirit. I started marketing myself. I started actually attracting aligned clients. And once you start doing good work with people, they start
mhm.
talking to other people.
Right.
So I would get most of my referrals through word of mouth. And then I just decided, you know what? I'm going to build a social media presence. I'm going to build my website, and I'm going to take myself down from Psychology Today, like all the therapist
Mm,
directories,
okay.
because that wasn't where my clients were coming from. It was coming from my community in the Bronx. Um, my community on social media, people who I've worked with in the past who are like, oh, I know someone who'd be really great for your teen, to work with. And I work with all populations, but my specialty has always been children, families, and teens because
Okay.
of my experience as a school social worker. So Literapy was sort of born from that place of starting my private practice and really being decisive about how I want to share with people how I
Mhm.
heal and how I
Mhm.
work and how I use books.
Mhm.
Because I think beyond like reading self-help with your therapist, people hadn't really thought about or haven't been talking a lot in more recent days about the use of books to heal. And so it's exciting.
It definitely is exciting, and I have gone through some of your process. Tell people how, let's say, if someone comes on and they want, well, first of all, they'll ask you what is bibliotherapy, and then if they want to work with you, what are some of the ways that they can work with you?
Absolutely. So the first thing I say, bibliotherapy, there's the official definition that the American Library Association issued in 1966, which is the use of um, guided selected reading materials for the solution of personal problems. That's the official definition. But to me, I just say the use of literature to heal. And that could look many different ways. That could mean reading a book with your therapist, reading a book your therapist recommends. That could be expressive creative bibliotherapy, where your therapist is asking you to write a letter to your younger self, write a letter to a loved one who recently passed away, and then burn it. It could also look like receptive prescriptive bibliotherapy, where I break that down just to say book matching,
Okay.
understanding a book that could be most helpful to a client in need. Like, what book do they need at what particular moment in their life? Um, and then sometimes we don't even read whole books, we just pull from literature. So maybe there's like a poem or an excerpt that would really help to elicit some emotions, because that's what really book matching is about, is like pairing the client with the right book at the right time to help emotions rise to the surface. So much of the way that we live is we're sort of like disassociated, right, through life, just taking care of our responsibilities, getting up every day, going to work, taking care of the kids, trying to take care of ourselves. And so the way that books allow us to slow down, to be present with ourselves, to be present with what we're feeling, is really the power, the therapeutic power of reading. And a therapist pulls from that in order to help you relate to yourself and relate to them in the therapy room. If that's a long-winded answer, but
No,
I hope
it
it answers.
explains exactly. Well, we have been following each other on social media. Okay, hold on a second. There's a question. Would you say that there are several uncertified but highly helpful bibliotherapy ninjas working as librarians today?
Librarians are definitely bibliotherapists, absolutely, as are educators. And so that's an important, thank you for that question, because that's an important distinction to make, that within bibliotherapy, there are two different categories. There's developmental bibliotherapy, and then there's clinical bibliotherapy. So, and this was created by Rhea Rubin, who was a librarian. She classified bibliotherapy in these two ways. So developmental bibliotherapy would be bibliotherapy that like a librarian, a parent, a teacher would use to help the development of a person. The mental health treatment aspect is the clinical bibliotherapy. And that's really where we're book matching to help the healing process, to help a client make deeper connections between what they're feeling, what they need, what they want, relationship struggles. There's a lot you can do within clinical bibliotherapy. So not every bibliotherapist is a mental health therapist, a licensed therapist, but there are many people who might call themselves bibliotherapists, and librarians are one of those people.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking that question, Margaret. It's a good question. But as I said, we've been following each other for a while, and I knew that I was going to be interviewing you earlier on. So I said, let me go ahead and start this process. So when I came, went to your website at Literapy NYC, which is scrolling at the bottom, and you have an intake form. So that's kind of where you get started if you want to go through this particular process. So, what kinds of questions do you generally ask people in that I know, but let them know. What kind of questions do you ask in that intake form?
Yeah, so I want to get to know you all as a reader. Sometimes I'll get clients that come to me strictly for bibliotherapy, not mental health therapy. And so it's really important, if I haven't met you yet, for me to assess your reading style, your genre preferences. I want to know what's the last book you read that deeply impacted you. And by impacted, that could mean you can't stop thinking about it. You're still in your feelings about it. Maybe you're mad.
Mhm.
Maybe you're sad. Maybe these characters are still living rent free in your head, or a character that feels ancestral on some level. Like, I really want to know what's the last thing you read that still sits with you and why. Why do you think that? I always ask about a reader's childhood. So, like, what's a book that you read when you were a young person or a child that you'll never forget, or that you often, go back to and reread? Definitely always ask about, triggers and anything that you absolutely do not read or avoid in books is really important to me, because I want to be trauma informed and trauma sensitive. And also, like, what kind of reader are you? There's people who, I forget what the word is for it. I see it all the time on Bookstagram, like the polyamorous readers or poly
Okay.
readers who, they're reading like 5 books at a time,
Yeah.
never
I
just
can't
reading
do
one.
more than two, but
Right. And so that's an important bit of information for me to know. Like, are you someone who's just always like pulling from books? Are you like very monogamous about your books and you just read one from cover to cover and then you'll move on to the next one? So asking a lot about like your reading habits and preferences.
okay. So yes. So with that in mind, in order for you to give a book prescription, which is I have one, in order for you to do that, that means you must read a lot of books, or you just have a really extensive resource list. So which is it? A combination of both, or how do you decide which book?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so have you ever heard of the term
You
I
have a
want to say it
compliment on the
correct.
screen as well. Emma's book
Oh,
are excellent.
Charlene.
Yeah, she gives great. She gives
That's my
great.
girl. I love
Oh,
you,
that's your
Charlene.
girl.
Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah.
Charlene.
Charlene wrote an article on Literapy NYC for Parents Magazine. So y'all
Yeah.
should check that out. It's a beautiful article about developmental bibliotherapy. And she even interviewed one of the mothers that I worked with, Kim, who's just an amazing mom and speaks a lot about her reluctance to seek out a therapist and then finding me
Mhm.
on Instagram. But yeah, Charlene's amazing.
Mhm. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted to make sure you saw that.
Thank you. Bibliomancy. Have you heard about that term?
I haven't.
So bibliomancy is a term that pretty much it means, how can I describe it? It's sort of like divination through books.
Okay.
The most concrete way I could explain it is like, did you grow up in the church as well?
Kind of, sort of. I
Kind
have
of,
a
sort
lot
of.
of churchy relatives.
It's kind of like, back in the day, like when our grandmothers or foremothers would go to the Bible and you just pick up the Bible and turn to any page and read.
Oh
And you feel
yes,
like
it's like
it's
it's your
spirit led.
prophecy.
Right, exactly. And so bibliomancy is sort of this practice of just believing that the right book and the right passage will come to you at the right time and being spirit led when you go to your books. Like intentionally setting that intention that, man, like, let's say I'm feeling really depressed today. I'm thinking about the friend that I just lost and
Mm.
I'm in the mood for some poetry. Maybe I set the intention of like, let's see, what's a book Lex might have liked to read. I pick
Mm.
up some Sonia Sanchez and I just open to a poem and I read it. And that could be book medicine. And so I use this, and I didn't even know this term. My friend Eniafe Isis, who I met through Instagram as well, she's one of my favorite poets and writers, told me about this term. And I was like, oh my goodness, divination through books. That's absolutely how I book match. I pray over every single client before I curate a session for them or prescribe books to them, whether I've met you or not, whether you pray or not, whether you're, someone who is spiritual or not. That's a huge part of my practice. And so, yes, I'm reading all the time. I'm making book lists all the time. I have a book club where I send out monthly book lists, and I share weekly bibliotherapy book recs. And so I have like catalogs of books that have helped people in my book club and clients that I've worked with around very specific issues. But I don't prescribe books that way. Like people have asked me if I'd be willing to sell those book lists like on my website. But the
Mm,
reason I don't do that is because I don't believe as a bibliotherapist that I can just say, "Hey guys, like this is a list of all books that I think will help you if you're depressed."
mm, right.
Because I book match in a very particular way for that person who's depressed in that particular season, right? Like your depression when you're 25 might look different than when you're 53, than
Hmm.
when you're going through menopause, or than when you've just recently lost a child. And
Right.
so I don't do prescriptive lists like that, but I do have lists for myself that I pull from.
Yeah. Blanket prescriptions. Yeah. No.
And there's a lot of bibliotherapists who have published articles and books that are just that. Like, and
Mm,
this is no shade to them because everybody works differently. But Ella Berthoud is the bibliotherapist who wrote the novel Cure. And the novel Cure, that's exactly what it is. It's a book of about 300 pages. You go to she's British. So she says life ailments instead of problems. And you go to your problem and she'll have like a list of 5 or 6 books that you could read that will help solve that problem. But I don't work that way. I do have that book though. It's a goodie.
well, I
It's
mean,
in good
'cause a
shape.
lot of times, what they say, you chew the meat and spit out the fat.
Right.
Take what's good and whatever
Leave
isn't. Yeah. So yes, Trinette, we are all different. So I love that you don't do the one size fits all. Yes, and I brought that. Oh, I asked that question because you gave me a book prescription. It might be hard to see because sometimes the light makes it a little crazy to actually see what the books are. But I'll tell you the 3 books that you prescribed to me based upon my the questionnaire were The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray, Don't Cry for Me by Dr. Daniel Black. And both of those are historical fiction, which actually is my favorite genre, but you didn't know that when you
I
prescribed.
did it. Yeah.
That's all I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then the last one, which I have had a chance to read or listen to the audio of already, is Pause, Rest, Be, Stillness for Courage in Times of Change, which I did. Yes, you have your copy. I have to get a physical copy because I did the audio. And as I was telling you before we came on, I love that book so much that it's like I need it so I can highlight and bend the
Yes.
pages and make notes and all of that stuff. So I'm like, well, how did she know? And I mean, even in Pause, Rest, Be, there's just so much in there that I resonated with,
Beautiful.
which is why I said I have to get a physical copy so that I can dog ear it and do all of those things. So we have a couple of oops, now make sure I'm gonna love The Personal Librarian. Yeah, I just have to find time to read it. That's
I know that's right.
right, because I do a book every week with the BGC Book Club. So sometimes I don't get to read just for the sake of reading. And someone else, I've read The Personal Librarian. We love a historic fiction recommendation. And Pause Rest B sounds like it's going to be on the list. Yes, it's good. So, with that being said, once you prescribe a list to someone, how do you then, because I know that you offer where you can just get the list like what I have, and people just go and kind of read on their own and glean what they're gonna get out of the recommendations. But then you also can offer like one-on-one sessions where you kind of go through books and stuff like that. So since I've read Pause Rest Be already, if you and I were going to have a session, what kinds of things would you ask me about that book, or how would that kind of go?
Yeah, let's jump into it. So, the first question I would ask you is how did you feel while you were reading it? How did you feel in your body, in your mind, and your heart?
I felt like that book just spoke to so many things that I have been going through or experiencing in my life. It talked about loss, which I lost my dad actually 5 years ago. Next week, I lost my dad, and he and I were very close. It talks about figuring out who you are and who you want to be, how you want to show up in the world in terms of your job and your career. You and I talked about that earlier as well. I just took on a new job that allows me to serve the audience that I want to serve 24/7 in my day job, as well as the things I do after the hours. And it also
Mhm.
talked a lot about just learning how to, as the book says, pause, to rest, to just be. So
Yeah.
those are the things that really resonated with me. Like, yeah, I need to just sometimes just sit still because I'm busy.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
all over the place because I'm all over the place in a good way. But sometimes I'll admit I don't slow down and just woosah, like I need
Yes.
to.
Do you see how even in answering my question, you started slowing down?
Hmm.
Right? And like that's what this book does. It's the ease of spirit that it gives you. And for those that haven't read it yet, it's a restorative yoga book. So even though there's a lot of poetic language and prose in it, she's really encouraging us to sit with her words and to experience her words somatically in our body. There's moments in the book where there's even poses that she asks us to rest in. And I remember some of those poses felt so nourishing to
Hmm.
me specifically. So much pain in my hips, which is
Mm.
where Black women mostly hold our tension and our trauma, which I didn't know, but I went down a rabbit hole.
Mm.
So for
Okay.
you, did you try any of the poses that she shared, and what did you observe in your body?
I didn't get a chance to try the poses in the book specifically yet. However, on Sunday, now this is, mind you, I read the book or listened to the book this week. On Sunday, I went to a yoga class, and one of the things that we were doing was like the stretching of the hips, and we did the savasana, which is kind of like where you just lay there
Yes.
and you're really not doing anything, just kind of, just enjoying being in that peaceful space.
Yes.
So that part too, I was like, well, wow, the timing, because you gave me this list a while ago, but it's like the timing of when I listened and what I'm doing and getting ready to go to another class on the weekend. So yes, but just being still and kind of learning how to cocoon yourself and just, love on yourself.
Yes.
That's so powerful. And I look forward to, which is why I need the book, the physical book, so I can like see and like
Yeah.
really read it and say, okay, I need to take 10 minutes to get all my little goodies together. And then I'm going
Yes.
to lay here and just,
Yes.
be one with my thoughts and, and with spirit. So,
I love the word that you used, cocooning myself. That's exactly what I felt like reading her book. And like you said, grabbing on my goodies. There's moments where she'll say, stop and go get a bunch of pillows from your bed. And I'm like, I'm
mhm.
not putting my pillows on the floor. I hear my mom's
Right,
voice in my head real quick.
right.
But that's what she's asking us to do, is to simply like stop and nourish yourself and be with yourself. Someone in the comments wrote a
Oh
funny.
yeah, I'll put that up. It's like, you're desperate when you're Googling, how do I just sit with myself?
Right.
Yeah, how do I do that? Yes.
Right. And I feel like this book answered that question for me.
Yes.
How do I
Mm-hmm.
just sit with myself? It's literally a how to guide. And
Mm-hmm.
it addresses not just somatically in our bodies, how can we be still, but also in our minds. Like, how do I silence the inner noise enough to give
Mm-hmm.
myself the luxury of being still? Because for many of us, that feels like a luxury.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that's really what I would do. And I might even ask you to share some excerpts with me that really spoke to you. Um, I love asking clients, like, what question did this book answer for you?
For me, it just clarified or verified or I can't think of the word they use in the church. Confirmation. That's
Yes.
it. It gave me confirmation that I am on the right track in terms of just that finding that peace and
Mm,
that learning how to quiet myself because when you're a creative and you got a lot of things going on. Even sometimes when I'm supposed to be resting, I'm really not resting because my mind is like, oh, I need to do this for the job, or I
yeah.
need to, I just saw so and so on Instagram. I need to make sure I make a note to email them. I'm always thinking of
Always on the go.
ideas, and sometimes it's hard to just. So that's what this book did for me.
Yeah.
And because the pause rest be, but the subtitle is stillness for courage in the times of change. And
Yes.
I have been going through a lot of changes, work. I started a new job last month, something that I always wanted to do, but it's still new. So, figuring all that out. And so it is a time of change. And so this book is going to remind me that And I will continue to listen to the audio because it's soothing, to hear the voice as well.
Yeah.
But, to be able to go back and read and reflect, I definitely will continue to do that. So that's what I got from it. And
I
I
love
thank you.
that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's beautiful. That's all I wish for, when I prescribe these books. And sometimes I'll even ask clients in the session, like, do you want to read the excerpt out loud to me? Because I'll get a bit of information based on what they read, how they read. Sometimes tears might appear while they're reading, or moments of silence, a voice might crack, or there might be a pause somewhere. Like all of that to a therapist is information. And sometimes we're not even aware, right, of like what's coming up for us.
Mhm.
But by having a client read it to me, and it's a very vulnerable, intimate thing to read and be read to, I learn a lot from my clients. And sometimes I'll even ask them, like, do you want me to read to you? And
Mhm.
I'll get a client every now and then that loves being read to. So I end up reading the entire bibliotherapy session. And then I'll get some clients to be very honest, like they're so traumatized from
Mm.
literacy and how they grew up, and the schooling aspect of literacy, that they're like, no, please don't. Can we just not read
Mm.
at all? Let's just talk
Yeah.
about what I read. I don't want to read at all in the session. And that's okay
Mhm.
too.
That's a valid point. That actually brings up something else. One of the things that I do, actually, I'm doing it tomorrow. I volunteer to read at a school once a week.
Love that.
Normally, it's just with one girl that I'm helping her, so her literacy can increase. But tomorrow, I'm actually going in. I'll be reading to like groups of students, and just the opportunity to read and to have someone sit and be enthralled by the reading. And because I'm reading the kids and this kids book, I know, I put on all the voices. I do all of that stuff. But there is something to that. I mean, yes, to help them to learn to love books, but think about having a story read to you at night, as a
Yes.
child, or like even now we have some of these apps that have sleep stories.
Yes.
So, the power of hearing someone read to you, there's a lot of power in that.
There is, and there's so much like vulnerability in that when you haven't been read to, when you didn't have the experience of being nurtured through books, or even having like a parent or a family member, a loved one when you were growing up, like just like sit and read with you or to you. So for some adults, like bibliotherapy is their first taste of what that's like, and it's like, oh wow, this is nice. This feels good. And for others, it's activating, and we can talk about like why and be curious about it. But all healing begins with community and in connection with others. And so, whenever I can get a client to bring their love of literature into the therapy room with me, I know we're going to do some good work, because you're reading whether you're in therapy or not. This is a part of your inner life. And so, by bringing your love of books into the therapy room, you're letting your therapist enter your inner world. And that's exciting, because
Mhm.
how many opportunities do we get in this life to like actually feel our feelings,
Right.
and find like safe spaces and people to share the how we feel, like authentically, for real, not like the sugar coated stuff, or um the delusions that we sometimes convince ourselves of so that we can survive this crazy unpredictable world, right? So literature is a portal back to self, back to connection with others, and I just really have found that it helps a lot of people who otherwise really struggle interpersonally to connect to others. Or they can, but it's awkward and it's uncomfortable. So having a tool like literature
Mhm.
makes it less uncomfortable, more non-threatening. We just talking about what you're reading, girl. That's all.
Right,
Just tell me what
exactly.
you're
Which is
reading.
probably why book clubs, book clubs are so popular, in
Yeah.
person and virtual as well, when people can come into a space and kind of talk through what they've read. But I tell people all the time, one of the reasons, and I do love, Pause Recipe falls more in the self-help category. Of course, I love self-help books, but I also love the historical fiction because I like to learn something when I'm reading. But
Yeah.
honestly, I can't think of any time that I've read something that I didn't get at least one nugget out of.
Right?
But I'm just wired that way. Some people maybe just read for the entertainment of it all and aren't looking to get anything. And for me, it's a combination of both.
Yeah, some people really aren't, or they'll tell me that, like, I don't know, it's not that deep. I just like to read stories. And it's like, okay, but all of life is stories. That's how we
Mm-hmm.
make meaning out of life. So whether you know it or not, you're living a story right now. So
Mm-hmm.
even like other than being a bibliotherapist, I'm trained as a narrative therapist. And so all of narrative therapy is about looking at the multiple narratives of our lives, whether that's how we grew up, um, right? Like who's the villain in our story? Who's are
Mm-hmm.
we the hero? Are we giving, I love the young people, it's main character energy, right? Like are we giving main character energy, or are we giving sidekick energy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I like talking in these terms too with clients who are bookish, because it makes these elements and these internal images come to life in a different way, and it's like, oh, okay, like I guess I never thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
um and it's exciting, even with fiction. I think sometimes like I'll get like an elitist, a highly intellectual client, like they want to talk about dark academia, or this isn't therapy to them. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll be like, okay, well then let's talk about the last thing that you read, whether it's a fantasy book. Like we can use that. Anything that you've read that you've loved, we can use it. And once we start breaking it down to what emotions does it elicit, who's a character that you hate and why? Who does
Mm-hmm.
that character remind you of?
Ooh.
Right? Now all of a sudden we're doing some good therapy work, and you didn't think I was gonna get you, right?
Right,
But these are
right.
all projections. And this is a major defense mechanism that we use as human beings. We project. We have shadow selves that we don't always accept, that we don't always talk about. We all feel feelings that we don't want to admit to feeling: jealousy, envy, hatred, shame, fear. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so books are a place where all of those emotions can rise up to the surface. We're not being judged for it. And even if we are, whatever, because it's just me by myself and my own inner critic. And I can just shut the book, you know, close the book up, put it away until my tolerance is back up, and then I can pick it back up and start where I left off. And so the self-paced manner that books allow us to tap
Mm-hmm.
into the shadow self, to tap into the parts of ourselves that we otherwise deny, is the therapeutic power of bibliotherapy.
All right. Thank you so much. We have a comment. I feel like this is the perfect live to be a part of. Of course it is. As someone who is finishing their master's and on the way to licensing, who loves literature and narrative therapy, thank you so much.
Love to see it.
Oh, yes. Earthly Pages. I like that name too.
Yes. And I have a carousel on my page on Instagram. If you go to my bibliotherapy highlight, that tells you exactly where and how to be trained as a
Okay.
bibliotherapist. So check
Okay.
that out.
Okay, Earthly Pages, you got that, and it's scrolling at the bottom, so you shouldn't have any problem finding it. So yeah, that's really powerful, and I'm glad that this particular episode is resonating with so many people. I think there are a lot of folks who love to read, and just the whole idea of therapy, with books is just so exciting to me, and I'm sure it is to others as well. But talking about the different forms, I've heard art therapy, dance therapy, things like that. I have a friend, I'm actually a coworker, who is studying, is it horticulture therapy? And I'm
Yeah.
like, what, with plants? So
It's a thing. It's a
it's
real
a thing.
thing. There's
So
even, I don't know if it's equestrian therapy, but there's a therapist I recently connected with, another benefit of social media, who does like horse therapy.
wow.
And like strictly works with horses. So there's like people doing really cool stuff. And you know what I love about this too is that it's decolonizing mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and it's decentering the therapist. Like, yeah, I am an expert in my field. I'm educated. I have some tools, but I'm not healing you. You're healing yourself. I'm just there as a guide, as a support. Like, we need to decenter the therapist and center our own inherent wisdom, our ancestral wisdom, our intuition, the knowledge that we have in our bones. And I think that that's another benefit of tuning into the stories of others, of our ancestors, and understanding history so that we know like where we come from and where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you just Margaret just read a book about gardening as therapy. So there you have it. But yeah,
I
I ain't
love
never heard of it
it.
before. I'm like, what?
Ooh, I have a book prescription for you, Margaret.
Okay.
um Mares in the Earth by Asia Suler. Phenomenal book. Oh my goodness.
Say the name again.
It's Mirrors in the Earth by
Okay.
Asia Suler.
Okay.
Such a beautiful book. I couldn't put it down.
Okay, you got that, Margaret? See, y'all didn't know you were gonna come and get your own book prescriptions. How about
See?
that?
You see how we did that? Just a little alley-oop.
Yes, yes, that's super exciting. Well, you brought something up to me before we came online. We've got about 15-ish minutes left that I had forgotten about, but it's something that I wrote. So I'm going to let you talk about that because I had forgotten all about it. But you read something that I wrote a long time ago on my the Brown Girl Collective page or
Yes.
website.
Yes, it was an open letter to my sisters. It was a blog post that you had shared. And it was a letter that you wrote to your community, which to me was like symbolic ceremonial bibliotherapy. Um, and you said a few things in that letter that felt like love, like, but also loving correction, not just to us, but for yourself. Like you acknowledge that even though you've curated this space in this community, that you're not perfect, right? And like, and I think what really struck me was you started the letter, correct me if I'm wrong, with an apology. It was something like, the first thing I want to
Mm-hmm.
say is I apologize to anyone that I may have unknowingly harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And whoa, like, I don't know why, but that just like hit different. Um, because I think that we often forget that like intent and impact, right, are very different things. And like maybe we do cause harm without knowing it. And like how would we know if no one ever says anything? And I think for me being a fairly new to this entrepreneurial journey and building my practice, like I'm quickly learning how people it's a lot of clout chasing that goes on. It's a lot of numbers chasing and how many followers do you have and who are you gonna collaborate with, and um your rate, and do you get paid or not get paid, and
Mm-hmm.
how much free labor do you give. And as Black
Right.
women, we're constantly being asked for our labor for free. But also, like, we know that many of us don't succeed in business because we don't have the support that we need. So for you to start that letter off with like an open apology really struck me. And I started thinking like, dang, like who have I harmed that maybe I didn't mean to harm intentionally, or who maybe feels like I've left them behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a whole community of people, and even the students that I used to serve as a school social worker here in the Bronx. Like I think about them every day and I grieve that loss every day. But the reality of it is that I had my daughter at the height of the pandemic. My son was diagnosed with autism, and I couldn't go back after my maternity leave. And I knew then and there that work is going to have to look different for me. But in that process, and in this process of building Literapy, like, am I harming anybody? I hope not,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or like, what's the perception? you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you speak so eloquently to perception, reality, yours and everyone else's. And it was just such a glaring example, a beautiful example of like leadership. Um, as a Black woman in leadership who is, curating a community, I really respected and admired it. And for me, it was like a blueprint of how I want to move. And just everything that you do within Brown Girl Collective, I feel like any Black woman business owner who moves with love and integrity, like I pay attention to your steps, because those are the steps that I hope to walk in. And that letter was really it was beautiful, and it wasn't very long. You didn't say too much. I think it's like 3 paragraphs, but you managed to like give us a hug, give us the vision, and also like let us know like, and yo, don't put me on a pedestal, because I'm just like y'all, just trying to build community,
Right, right.
for
And
us by us.
thank you so much, because when you said it, I was like, huh? What? I had to go back and look. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to read the whole thing because this is Emily's moment, but I will make sure that I post a link to it so people can go back and read what we're talking about, because it was actually written, I'm looking here, it was written back in 2013. So this letter is 10 years old
Wow.
when I originally wrote it.
And
So
that would be bibliotherapy for you to go
yeah.
back and read it.
Yes, yes, and share it out. But I mean, it is something because I guess a thought that comes to me, and I'm sure it applies to you in your work as well. Check your motive. Why are you doing what you're doing? And to make sure that you are doing a thing, something that is helping and not harming. And creating safe spaces and all those sorts of things are important to me, because I know what I may have missed out on at different points in time, and just because I may not have gotten it in the past doesn't mean that I don't see the importance of it and leaving it to somebody else. So
Amen to that. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, I am one bibliotherapist, right? So like I'm not out here trying to pretend like I'm the GOAT of bibliotherapy, or I am one therapist who uses bibliotherapy, who is trying to build a platform to show other therapists coming up that they can do this too, and to educate people who are readers on how the science of reading, benefits our mental health. But I am one person. I am not God, right? Like even in the moments that I do feel like are highs for me, I try not to get too high and remind myself that like this is spirit led. It's not about me. It feels good to have an article in Parents Magazine, and it feels great to be invited on platforms like this one, but like also don't put me on a pedestal either. You know what I mean? And just trying to continue to be led from a place of divine guidance and grace. And that's what this is really about, is like putting the creative arts therapies back on the map, putting self-healing practice back on the map, especially in Black and Brown communities, especially in places where mental health resources are not accessible or are not resonating with folks. Here in the Bronx, we got one bookstore, the Lit Bar, and the owner of the Lit Bar had to work so hard just to establish her bookstore. So it's like a literary desert here in the Bronx. And if I can get one kid who's in high school thinking about college to think about becoming a therapist and becoming a bibliotherapist, and without thinking about the lack of access that they might have because of the color of their skin or which college they can get into, then great. Because let's be honest, I'm privileged. I got a full scholarship to Mount Holyoke College. If I didn't have a full scholarship, I would have never been able to go. I would have just went to a community college like a lot of, people in my family did. And so I want that to be very clear too, that like there's privilege in me being an African American, Puerto Rican, 37-year-old woman and mother who was able to leave my job, build a practice. I also have a very supportive husband, right, who was on board with that, to make this happen. So this is not like, I think sometimes people look at the product and they think that like that just occurred and it was just like a blessing. And it's like, no, it's, for some reason, the image of like the threshing floor and sifting through grain comes up for me, of like the surrender to the call, and what spirit has for you to do on this timeline. And I feel like Literapy is my thing to do. So hopefully it touches people and it gets people thinking about, our ancestors who were librarians. Shout out to Sadie Peterson Delaney. I want y'all to know that name. She's known as the godmother.
Charlene asked about it.
Yep.
You should talk about Sarah Delaney.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, Charlene. Yeah, I have a webinar. It's a course, and you can purchase it on my website, Bibliotherapy 101. And as I was putting together the resources for my webinar, I stumbled across an article where Sadie Peterson Delaney, who's a Black woman, was regarded as the godmother of bibliotherapy. And immediately I started digging into the research, because I was like, how is it that I've been trained as a bibliotherapist, but I've never seen her name? So she was the first librarian at Tuskegee. She created the blueprints for the treatment of veterans in the Veterans Hospital, using literature. Like, I didn't see her name in any of these manuals on bibliotherapy. So that was of concern to me. So that's another reason why, I'm doing this work, because I want people to know the names of our ancestors who contributed to this field. Just like anything else in history, right? They try to whitewash the history and write us out of it. And so we need to write ourselves back into it. And that's what I hope to do, even if it's just like plant a little seed. Maybe somebody out there is Googling Sadie Peterson Delaney tonight and, going down that same rabbit hole.
Absolutely. It's so funny that you say that about the history, because one of the things that helped me to build Brown Girl Collective up was a sharing of history. And admittedly, so life gets in the way, and I've gotten away from it a little bit, started it back at the beginning of the year, and life got crazy again. But it's coming back for those who know me from doing that, because it's so important. Because, like Em has said, we don't want to lose those stories. There are so many powerful people of color that have done wonderful things in this world. I mean, yeah, we're still seeing first, of course, but there over the years, over the centuries, there's been a lot of things that we don't hear about. We're coming up on the end of Black History Month,
Yeah.
which is way too short for the amount of stories that can potentially be told. So that is something I personally, for Brown Girl Collective, am working on a way to do it, for that I can get it out to you, but also have time to pause, rest, and be.
Indeed.
I
I
gotta,
know that's
gotta
right.
do that. I gotta do that. So, just some comments. Earth truly goals. You both are. Thank you. Seeing others thrive. This is what I needed this week. Thank you so much. You are so welcome. Earthly Pages. I like that name. And we have Paula. Thanks, Emily, for very informative, interesting conversation. I really enjoy audiobooks. Yes, I like being read too. Yes. Do you have a link for the webinar that you have coming up, or is that something you can go to your website to get?
Yeah, if you just go to my website, you can go to I believe it's linked at the top, like Literapy Shop, and it will say Shop Bibliotherapy Webinar, and you can purchase my course there. It's recorded and you can access it at any time.
Okay.
It's also linked to my social media link tree as well.
Okay. And the training for being a bibliotherapist, is that
Yep.
there as well?
And the training for being a bibliotherapist is not on my website. I have to make a blog post about that. But if you go to my social media and you click in my highlights, so on the top you'll see like different highlights, and one is bibliotherapy. There's a carousel in that highlight that has like 6 different organizations that you can train to be a bibliotherapist with.
All right. All right. And she's like, yeah, October too. Yes, for British Black History Month. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because one thing, when I do share, I share worldwide. It's not just American women. So yeah,
Yes, I
it's
love that.
important to know, like, okay, so and so was doing something over in Europe somewhere, or in Africa, or wherever the case
I
may be.
love that.
So
You said something earlier about history, and I wanted to know if you are familiar with this book releasing next week, The Humanity
I'm
Archive.
not. No, you said I'm about to start writing here.
This is your book prescription for tonight. Jermaine
Okay.
Fowler, who is the founder of the Humanity Archive. It's one of the top podcasts on African American, really American history,
Okay.
in today's modern day. But this book, let me tell you, I'm halfway through it, and he put his entire foot, his whole
Okay.
leg, both his legs
Okay.
in this book.
Okay.
And what I love about it is he's self-taught. He talks about his struggle with academia, but just like growing up as a young Black boy in the library, and his
Mhm.
love of books is bibliotherapy that helped him put
Wow.
this archive together. But lesser known narratives are shared. I'm just in awe of how much ground he covered in this book. So y'all check out the Humanity Archive. It's coming out on the 28th. That's next Tuesday's pub day. Y'all are gonna love this one.
Okay. Well, you know me. I will go and pre-order. I don't have a problem with that.
Yes.
Yes, because I'm, always, definitely wanting to learn more and just expand my horizons, and having people like you help all of us to expand our horizons. So I really do appreciate you being here, and I want to thank you because I know, we talked earlier. There's some things that you've been dealing with lately, and my prayers and my heart are with you. During this time, I appreciate that you canceled a bunch of other people, but you didn't cancel me. So that says a lot. That means a lot. And don't get me to crying on this screen. Because the last time we got together, I think we were all
Yeah.
teary-eyed at the end of the night. So yes, I'm not
Yeah.
going to do that this time. But it is indeed a pleasure to talk to you. Whenever you've got something going on, whatever it is, I want to be in the loop. Well, I will, because we follow each other on social. But, if ever you want to come here and talk about something that you're working on, just, hit me up. You know how to get me.
Thank you. I
Have you
appreciate
come on.
that.
Have you come on.
Thank
Oh, one thing you didn't mention that I know you were working on something for bibliotherapy in the Bronx or something like that. Is that still?
Yeah. So listen, y'all, your girl. I got some writing to do. I'm working on a manuscript for Bibliotherapy in the Bronx. Man, it started off as one thing, and it's becoming this big thing. So, a little bit of my life story, a little bit of how I became a bibliotherapist, and a little bit about life in the Bronx, you know? So, I wasn't born in the Bronx, but I'm from the Bronx. I spent more than half of my life in the Bronx, but people from the Bronx are very careful to
Mhm.
separate or distinguish between native Bronx sites and those of us
Mhm.
that moved here later on. So I need to
Mhm.
make that distinction. But
Right.
Bibliotherapy in the Bronx is my book baby. And yeah, I'm working really, really hard on her. So pray for me, y'all.
All right, we definitely will do that. But yeah, what you just said made me think. I live on the outskirts of Atlanta, and I get that all the time. Ain't nobody in Atlanta from Atlanta anymore. What about the
Exactly.
native people from Atlanta?
Listen, I don't want no smoke. I don't want no smoke.
Exactly. So like, I don't live in it. I mean, I live in Atlanta, but I'm not from Atlanta. But my mother is originally from Georgia, so I kind of get a little bit just because of that. So
And listen, so much love to you. Thank you for sharing your dad with me today.
yeah,
I honor his life. I know you mentioned that you'll be commemorating his homegoing next week. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
thank
And in the
you.
midst of my loss, it means a lot, that we could share that with each other and just hold space for grieving because it's very real. And this is how we heal is by being able to find the people that can help us through that. So, my love to you.
I love to you as well. And we have one last comment. Good luck with the book, baby. Yes, yes.
I
So
receive it. I receive it.
yeah. Well, I saw some movement behind you, so somebody probably wants your attention. I'm waving if they can
It's
see.
probably my husband. It's probably my husband cutting up back there.
So he's like, it's time to go. It's getting late. So, well, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate you. And as I say, the door is always open for you to come on and talk to us. So, thanks again. You have a good night. And
You
I'm
as
going to let you
well.
go. And we'll talk again real soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye. All right, everybody. Wasn't that wonderful? That was so great. I really appreciated having Emely on with me and having a chance. The last time I talked to her, it was a part of a panel, so we didn't get to like really dig in like we did tonight. So I'm super excited that we had a chance to do that. And let's just continue to support her work, lift her up in prayer as she is lifting up others with all the wonderful work that she does. So I do have somebody for next week, but she needs to send me a picture, so that's why I don't have anything that I can show you who it is. But just to let you know, our next week's guest is going to come on and kind of piggyback on the whole thing of literature and education and all that sort of thing, but talk about some of the things that are happening in our school systems across the country and how we can, support our children and making sure that they're getting the education that they need in terms of Black history and things like that. So you'll find out more about that in the next day or so, but it will be the same time, same station. So I look forward to seeing everybody again next Wednesday at 8:00 p.m. for another very important and enlightening conversation. So thank you, Charlene. Yes, nice to meet you. Margaret, nice to see you again. So thank you, everyone. And I'll see you again real soon, hopefully next week. Take care. Bye-bye.